Cuba's power grid has long struggled with aging infrastructure and a heavy reliance on imported fuel. Venezuela was its main supplier until the U.S. stepped in. Joining us now to talk more about that is Dr. Andres Tremante of Florida International University, and he's here to help us explain the power grid in Cuba that exists and why it is so dependent on fuel. Dr. Tremante, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to help you out. Thank you for having me.
Explain to us in a way that we can all understand, what is the electric grid in Cuba rely on? How is it structured?
The electric grid is relying 95% on crude, on oil production, and 5% in other renewable sources like solar, wind, and water. Having said that, the oil production is very important in terms of what they are relying on. And basically, they have up to 4 refineries that they can go up to 120,000 barrels per day. That's what they have needed during the last 20 years, I would say. Again, some data is not accurate, but looking at the picture, 20, 30, 40 years ago, this is more or less the number average, again, 120,000 barrels per day that they need for their grid generation. But again, problems with obviously the oil coming for mainly 2 sources, Venezuela and Mexico, maybe going back to 1980 when the San Jose Energy Agreement was signed to help the Caribbean and mainly Cuba. Then since there, obviously now those sources are not sending more oil anymore. And then the oil production in Cuba is about 32,000 barrels per day. So their shortage is about 90. And that's the big problem. That's the gap between what they can produce and what the amount of the oil that they need.
So in our country, we talk about different sources, different vehicles to create energy, not just the oil energy. We have thermal power, for example. We have nuclear power plants, solar energy. What is the status of thermal power in Cuba or the nuclear power plants in Cuba?
They don't have nuclear power plants, even though they tried to start one of them, but was basically in theory. They have up to 12 known thermal power plants, basically relying on natural gas and oil. And out of those 12, only 4 or 5 are working well enough. And that's another problem. That's the gap between the amount of energy they can generate and the amount of energy that they really need. That gap, again, is about, just to give you a rough number, it's about 90,000 barrels per day. In terms of energy, I can give you another number. For example, average, taking into account that they have 11 million population or less, right? Currently, is about 1,100 kilowatt hours. Kilowatt hours is the most common energy unit that they use to compare apples with apples. So having said that, if you look at the neighborhood, if you look at the South Florida area, you look at Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, the Caribbean region, they consume 10, 12, 15 times more than the number that I gave you, the 1,100 kilowatt hours, which means that it's like a coin with 2 faces. One face is the energy consumption that they have, and the other face is the energy need that they would have. Therefore, it's about, the gap is a huge gap. It's about 10, yes, exactly. It's a lot. It's about 10, 1,200 of kilowatt hours. That's a lot. So in terms of the downstream pipeline, the consumer, is that what they need? And in terms of the generation upstream, that's what's happening, that I already shared with you about the barrels needed per day.
So at Florida International University, you are in the Department of Mechanical and Materials Engineering. So my question to you is, if you and your colleagues were asked to help rebuild or consult on what it would take to rebuild the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure of Cuba, what are we looking at?
We are looking at a huge problem. You will need human resources, not only mechanical engineering, but electrical engineering and technicians in the oil industry and the thermal power plants industry. a whole, let me just use this example, a whole FPL equivalent, right? In terms of three main things: energy generation, energy transportation, and energy distribution are at different levels, different type of power and voltage. So it's a huge tax. I would say that there are like, as per my best understanding, in Cuba, they have a gap in terms of energy generation. They have another problem in terms of the grid maintenance and operational. And that, unfortunately, putting the equation together, again, it's a huge, huge task in terms of human resources and budget.
We're talking about years, decades to rebuild?
We talking about something that could be feasible, again, as per my best understanding, I could be wrong, between 3 and 5 years, 110% effort task working all together throughout the island. Again, it's a huge task. It's a huge team of people working on that. And it's not that easy task. Would be, obviously, other folks may say, no, Andres, you need 10 or 15 years to rebuild the whole grid in terms of reliability and sustainability. Yes. So I just want to give you the two numbers.
Yes.
Short time will be 3-5 years. Long time will be up to 15 years.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate having you, Dr. Andres Tremante of Florida International University.
My honor. Thank you.